The ledger book is bound in hippopotamus hide, its pages stained with indigo and rust. The ink is made from acacia gum and charcoal ground fine as dust. The hand that writes in it belongs to a woman named Amara, a merchant of the Mali Empire, and she is recording a transaction that would be impossible in any world where Europeans had their way. She writes, 40 pounds of refined copper from the Congo workshops, traded for 300 yards of Kano blue cloth. The copper is not raw ore. It has been smelted in furnaces that reach temperatures the Portuguese once claimed were impossible without their bellows. The Congo metalworkers laughed at that claim, then showed them furnaces that used natural drafts and charcoal made from specific hardwoods, achieving temperatures that could melt copper into flowing rivers of light. The year is 1642. In our timeline, the Portuguese had already established a colony in Angola by now. The Dutch were fortifying Elmina. The Atlantic slave trade was already 2 centuries old and growing. But in this world, something went differently. Something broke the pattern. It began with a cough. In 1491, a Portuguese sailor named João de Santarém stepped onto the shore of the Kingdom of Congo carrying a bolt of wool cloth, a copper crucifix, and a strain of influenza that had never touched African soil. He made it 3 miles inland before the fever took him. His body was found by Congo hunters, who recognized the signs of a strange illness. They did not touch him. They reported to the man of Congo, who ordered the coastal villages to quarantine. When the rest of the Portuguese fleet arrived weeks later, expecting to find their scout already establishing relations, they found a shore lined with warriors who would not let them land. Not out of hostility. Out of a cold, pragmatic understanding that these pale strangers carried death in their lungs. The Portuguese waited. They sent gifts. They sent interpreters. They sent letters from their king. And while they waited, their ships sat in the harbor and the sailors drank from the same casks and the sickness spread among them. By the time the man of Congo agreed to receive a delegation, half the Portuguese crews were dead or dying. The survivors were too weak to demand anything. They accepted the terms the Congo offered, trade but no settlement, no forts, no conversion by force, no slaves. The word spread. The Oyo Empire heard. The Benin Kingdom heard. The Songhai Empire, already the largest state in West African history, heard and sent its own observers to the coast. Within a generation, every major African polity from the Senegal River to the Zambezi had developed a protocol for dealing with European ships, quarantine periods, designated trading posts on offshore islands or riverbanks never inland, armed escorts for any European who wished to travel beyond the coast. The Europeans cursed. They threatened. They tried to negotiate. But they were thousands of miles from home, and the African kingdoms were not impressed by their cannons. The Songhai had cannons too, cast from bronze they made themselves. The Benin bronze casters had been working metal for centuries before any European hammer struck an anvil in West Africa. The Congo had armies organized in disciplined formations, with commanders who studied the terrain and the weather and the morale of their men. And so the Europeans adapted. They traded. They paid tariffs. They followed the rules. The Portuguese built a factory on the island of São Tomé, and from there they conducted business with the mainland. The Dutch came later, and the English and the French. They all paid. They all followed the protocols. They all complained bitterly in their letters home, but they kept coming because the profits from gold and ivory and pepper and cloth were still enormous, even with the tariffs. The slave trade did not disappear, but it was transformed. African kingdoms had always practiced forms of servitude, but the chattel slavery of the Americas required a scale and a brutality that the African states had no interest in supporting. When European traders demanded slaves by the thousands, they were told no. When they offered guns in exchange for captives, some kingdoms accepted, but they regulated the trade tightly. The Oyo Empire, which had expanded through cavalry warfare, used its gun trade to become even more powerful, but it also set quotas. No more than 500 slaves per year. No children. No freeborn Oyo subjects. Only prisoners of war and only those convicted of capital crimes. The result was that the Americas developed differently. Without the massive influx of African labor, the plantation system in Brazil and the Caribbean remained small-scale. The Spanish and Portuguese turned to indentured labor from Europe, and then to the forced labor of indigenous populations, which led to rebellions and collapses, and a slow, grinding recognition that the New World colonies would never generate the wealth they had expected. The center of gravity of the Atlantic world shifted. The Caribbean became a backwater. Brazil remained a coastal strip of sugar plantations and cattle ranches, never the vast slave-powered engine of our timeline. But the story is not about what Europe lost. It is about what Africa became. Amara the merchant is traveling from Timbuktu to the city of Janneh, and the road she travels is paved. Not with Roman stone or Chinese brick, but with laterite gravel packed hard and crowned for drainage, with drainage ditches on either side and mile markers carved from sandstone. The roads of the Mali Empire have been maintained for centuries, since the days of Mansa Musa, and they are part of a network that stretches from the Atlantic coast to the borders of the House Estates. Along these roads move caravans carrying salt from the Sahara, gold from the Bambuk mines, cloth from the weavers of Kongo, books from the scholars of Timbuktu, and letters from the diplomatic corps that keeps the peace between empires. The peace is not perfect. The Songhai and the Mali have fought 3 wars in the past century. The Masi kingdoms raid the northern borders. The Kanem-Bornu Empire in the east watches its rivals with suspicion. But the wars are limited, regulated, concluded with treaties that are written in Arabic and Bambara and signed by both parties. Diplomacy is a profession in this world, not an afterthought. The University of Timbuktu has a faculty of international law that has produced treatises on the conduct of war, the rights of merchants, and the treatment of ambassadors. European diplomats who visit are astonished to find that the African kingdoms have a more sophisticated understanding of sovereignty than most European courts. Amara reaches Janneh as the evening call to prayer echoes from the Great Mosque. The mosque is not the mud brick structure of our timeline. It is a grander building, expanded and renovated over the centuries, with minarets faced in fired brick and a roof supported by columns of carved cedar from the forests of the south. The city around it is a maze of 2-story houses with flat roofs and wooden balconies, and the streets are lit by oil lamps that are lit at dusk and extinguished at dawn by a city-funded staff of lamplighters. She goes to the market, which is held in a square large enough to hold 10,000 people. The goods on display would make a European merchant weep with envy. There is silk from the savannah silkworms, which produce a fabric finer than anything from China. There is glass from the workshops of the House of Cities, where sand and soda ash are melted in furnaces that have been refined over generations. There is paper from the factories of Timbuktu, made from cotton rags and hemp, sold in reams to scholars and scribes and bureaucrats. There is steel from the smiths of the Mandinka country, who have mastered the art of crucible steel and produce blades that can cut through European armor like butter. Amara is here to buy books. She is a merchant of knowledge, as much as of cloth and copper. She travels from city to city, buying manuscripts and selling them to scholars and libraries. Tonight she will meet with a scholar from the University of Sankor, who has written a treatise on the mathematics of astronomy. Tomorrow she will negotiate with a dealer from the Swahili coast, who has brought texts from the Indian Ocean world. Next week she will return to Timbuktu, where her husband manages a shop near the mosque. But first, she goes to the house of her contact, a woman named Fatima who runs a school for girls in the eastern quarter of the city. Fatima is in her 60s, with gray hair and a face marked by smallpox scars, and she has been teaching for 40 years. Her school teaches reading, writing, mathematics, law, and theology. The students are the daughters of merchants and scholars and officials, and they will go on to become merchants and scholars and officials themselves. In this world, literacy among women in the Sahel is common enough that no one comments on it. It is simply normal. Amara and Fatima sit on cushions in a courtyard, drinking tea sweetened with honey, and they talk about the news. The Songhai emperor has died, and his son has taken the throne. The new emperor is young and untested, and there are rumors that the Masi are testing the borders. The Portuguese have sent another embassy to the Congo, demanding exclusive trading rights, and the Congo have refused. The Dutch are building a fort on the Gold Coast, despite the treaties that forbid permanent fortifications, and the local kingdoms are considering joint military action to have it removed. And there is news from the east. The Ottoman Empire has made contact with the Swahili city-states, and there is talk of an alliance. The Ottomans are interested in the Indian Ocean trade, and they see the Swahili ports as natural partners against the Portuguese. The Swahili are interested in the Ottomans as a counterweight to the Portuguese. Negotiations are ongoing. The outcome is uncertain. Amara listens and she nods and she makes mental notes. She will write a letter to her husband about the Songhai succession. She will adjust her trading routes to avoid the Masi border. She will consider whether to invest in goods from the Swahili coast in case the Ottoman alliance changes the trade patterns. This is the world of the unconquered continent. It is not a utopia. There are wars and famines and diseases and injustices. The rich are very rich and the poor are very poor. Slavery exists, though it is not the industrial-scale horror of the Atlantic system. Women have more rights than in Europe, but they are still subject to laws made by men. The kingdoms are monarchies, and the quality of governance depends on the quality of the monarch. But the continent is free. Free to develop its own institutions, its own technologies, its own philosophies. Free to trade with the world on its own terms. Free to learn from Europe without being conquered by it. Free to send its own scholars to study in Cairo and Istanbul, and even occasionally in Paris and London, where they return with knowledge of European science and medicine and adapt it to African conditions. The consequences ripple outward. Without the slave trade, the population of West and Central Africa is much larger than in our timeline. More people means more farmers, more artisans, more soldiers, more scholars, more markets, more innovation. The agricultural techniques of the region improve, with new crops from the Americas adopted voluntarily rather than forced. Maize and cassava spread across the continent, but they are integrated into existing farming systems, not imposed by colonial authorities. The Congo Kingdom, in particular, becomes a center of technological innovation. Its coppersmiths develop methods for producing brass that rivals anything from Europe. Its weavers create textiles that are traded across the Atlantic to Brazil and the Caribbean, where they are prized for their quality. Its scholars translate European works on medicine and astronomy into Kikongo, adding their own commentaries and corrections. In the East, the Swahili city-states flourish as intermediaries between the African interior and the Indian Ocean world. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, these are not colonies or outposts. They are independent city-states, governed by their own councils and sultans, trading with India and Persia and the Ottoman Empire. The architecture of their cities reflects this cosmopolitan heritage: coral stone houses with carved wooden doors, mosques with tile work from Persia, gardens with plants from India and China. And in the north, the Songhai Empire continues its expansion, not through conquest but through influence. Its language becomes the lingua franca of the Western Sahel. Its legal system is adopted by smaller states. Its university system attracts students from as far away as the Hausa cities and the forests of the Gold Coast. The Songhai emperors patronize scholars and artists, and the city of Gao becomes a center of learning that rivals Timbuktu. The centuries pass. The 18th century arrives, and with it, the Industrial Revolution. In our timeline, this was powered by the wealth of the Atlantic slave trade in the colonies. In this timeline, it is different. Europe industrializes more slowly, with less capital and fewer resources. The textile mills of England rely on cotton from India and the Ottoman Empire, not from the American South. The ironworks of Sweden and Russia expand, but they are not fed by colonial resources. Africa industrializes too, but on its own terms. The Congo Kingdom develops water-powered mills for grinding grain and processing cloth. The Songhai Empire experiments with steam engines, adapted from European designs but built with African materials. The Swahili city-states invest in shipbuilding, producing vessels that can sail the Indian Ocean and, eventually, the Atlantic. By the 19th century, the world is multipolar. Europe is powerful but not dominant. The Ottoman Empire is a major player, controlling the eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea. The Mughal Empire in India is still strong, having never been undermined by British colonial expansion. The Chinese Empire is inward-looking but immense, and Africa is a patchwork of independent states, some large and some small, some rich and some poor but all free. Amara is long dead by now. Her descendants are scholars and merchants and officials, scattered across the continent. The ledger book she wrote in is preserved in the library of Timbuktu, alongside thousands of other manuscripts that document the history of a continent that was never conquered. If you want to learn more about this world and the many other worlds that might have been, consider subscribing. Every week, we explore a different path not taken, a different fork in the road of history. The world is full of might-have-beens, and some of them are stranger than you can imagine. Until next time, keep wondering what could have been.